Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement, giving you a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be.
Thank you for joining us. In this episode, we're sharing some of the best moments from this season. So whether you are just joining us or have been with us from the start, we know you will enjoy these great highlights. And remember to check out the description to learn more about FMS and our special offers. Okay, now let's fire up the Season 6 finale of the Movement Podcast, powered by FMS. Episode 68. We're back and removing barriers to wellness.
We took a completely different approach to function than we've ever taken before. We learned from the movement screen that we can do less screens for less active people. We also learned from the movement screen that if you're going to completely train an athlete, you got to do some capacity screens too. But what we found out in the room is we're not even fixing ourselves. Healthcare and fitness professionals, strength conditioning professionals, we're not fixing ourselves, because when we come to the room, and you know, you got me last week for saying this. Lee usually opens what we do, but I walked out and it hit me in a very, very important way that I'm getting ready to lecture to, 110 focused people looking right at me, and they have absolutely no idea that 25 years ago, it used to take us about 15 minutes to movement screen one person. And 30 minutes from the time I started talking, Lee already had everybody in the room movement screened and actually did what I would call a bare minimum screen on the other 7 domains that support movement.
Yeah, and I think so you hit on something great that has been part of our fundamental philosophy going back 25 some years, and that's what's the minimum that you need? What's the minimum amount of data you need to make a decision? We could argue all day about some of that information, about how much data you can collect. Well, Lee, I need more. You can always get more.
Yep.
It'd be great to have more, but let's be honest, you're not getting any more time, you're getting less. People sitting in front of you want to know what are you going to do to fix them? Real time, like now. People want now. And the only way to really do that is figure out, all right, what's the minimum amount of information I can collect right now to then give you the best information about you,
okay,
on what you need to do.
No, and that's it. It's and that, by the way, that statement is stoicism at its best. That's not a cop-out. When you're thinking through with logic, you've got to take yourself to the worst case scenario and say, how little information can I make the next step with? And so when Lee and I get in debates or panel discussions or whatever, we know how to optimize a situation, right? Get out your checkbook. Take a lot of time, mark off your calendar, because it ain't going to happen quick. But if I've got to answer your question about low back pain, there's a minimum of questions I got to ask you, or all you're going to get's Google, and Google's going to tell you what the average consumption is. It's not going to tell you what you specifically need. And so everybody wants a tailored situation, but everybody wants to get that at general buffet prices. And including us, right? Just give me the bullet. But by going to that bare minimum, we don't have to argue anymore. If you're going to give me less than this, I think I'd like to withhold my opinion professionally, because it won't be a responsible thing. And so if people are answering your health, fitness, wellness, and even sports conditioning questions without actually sampling the 2 major things that are going to determine your outcome, how recovered are you on an average cycle, and what kind of stress loads are you under, they're basically just reading you something they read somewhere else in a general forum or platform. And so if you're truly going to give unique information, you've got to collect some unique data, but paralysis by analysis and a data dump is not what we're talking about.
I'm going to give you an example here, Gray, a personal example. And that's why it's important to start with screening, because what Gray just described right there is if you start with a screen and don't automatically start with this deep dive in assessing or testing everything, start with the screen, determine what's a priority. What is the number one thing you need to focus on right now? Here's my story. I go to the eye doctor because I was trying to get contacts, order a new set of contacts, and the eye doctors have figured it out. You can't order a new set of contacts without seeing them at least once a year. So I had to go to the eye doctor so I can get my new contacts, right? So I walk in and the I would argue, technician takes me back and does the typical screen of my eyes. Nothing invasive, nothing crazy. Just, can I read it? Literally the eye chart. I've been going to this same eye doctor for a few years. Can I read the eye chart? I then sit down and they take my blood pressure. Well, they take the blood pressure by sticking my little finger in the thing, and they do basically just the easiest way to take your blood pressure. My blood pressure, when they took it, was 220 over 140.
I didn't know that.
No, you didn't.
Did you reset those life insurance
I didn't
policies we
know
got
that.
on each other?
I'm like, whoa, that seems a little off right there. And the technician freaks out, walks out, and is like,
I don't want to be here when you pop.
Yeah, this guy's getting ready to pop. The eye doctor walks in and literally puts on says, hey, we need to check this out. She asked me a few questions and puts on the cuff, takes the blood pressure. Blood pressure is basically 125 over 82. So the technician may or may not have put it on right. It just didn't read right. Whatever the case is, but it didn't read right. My point is, what's the biggest priority? It ain't my eyes. It ain't the eye chart. It's the blood pressure that she just took. In our profession, that's how we need to look at things. Person walks in, we need to check the boxes. Taking my blood pressure going into the eye doctor is checking a box. That technician that put the thing on my finger and just did the most basic form was just to check a box to make sure I wasn't about to pop.
Right.
Once they figured out that, okay, this screening at the most fundamental level picked up something, now I need to go that direction and not that direction. And that's what we've been doing, Gray, but we did it with movement. All right, let's take a quick break here to tell you about Symmio. Symmio is our holistic wellness platform designed to give you the tools and resources to assess, manage, and improve your clients' and patients' overall health and wellness. Go to Symmio.com to sign up for a free trial today. That's SYMMIO.com.
We got 2 new courses I think you'll like. One's a deep dive on mobility and one's a deep dive on stability. We really unpack that and show you how simple single corrective exercises aren't nearly as good as a meal of mobility assembled in a flow, in a set of stations. Do the same thing for stability. It's sort of a new way of looking at things, but it's that same old functional approach, just with nice packages that actually give you huge dividends.
And now let's pick up where we left off. Episode 69. You can't talk about mobility without talking about stability.
A lot of my first treatment, exercise program, whatever I'm doing, is I will throw a few of these moves at you to see how much you improve. And if you improve in a significant amount, something almost surprising to you and surprising to me, you were being controlled by a lot of tone that you didn't have control over. Meaning you're using your back in a disorganized way, but at one point that may have been the only way you could get through the day.
All right, so let's talk about that for a second. Let's unpack that. So we're talking about a toe touch, something everybody can appreciate. I don't care who you're talking to. Hey, can you bend over and touch your toes? So I think the issue is a lot of people are limited in that toe touch.
Right.
So when they get limited and they come in and say, yeah, my hamstrings are tight, that's what's limiting. But yet, one of the next things you may do is have them sit down and do a traditional sit and reach test. Well, Gray, what if that same person who can't touch their toes is able to touch their toes and they sit and reach? What does that tell you?
These are the kind of questions that have actually helped me take something as simple as our movement screen and other things and realize that not all people who can't cover the standing toe touch look the same when we break them out. And that's why in healthcare, we got to do those breakouts. We got to find out what's driving that. So right now, a lack of mobility is not why the person you just said can't touch their toes, because sitting on the ground, you just demonstrated everything that needs to stretch out for you to make it to your toes is available and free. And yet the minute you assume a different posture or load and the responsibility of balancing and not falling over, you started using your muscles in a different way and that length disappears.
Because in essence, it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. You change the posture. Standing up and bending over and touching your toes versus sitting and doing a sit and reach, It's the same thing. You're asking the posterior chain, the tissues, as you just said, to do the same, elongate and lengthen the same way. But as soon as you change the posture, everything changes. You've changed that environment, you changed that posture. So the problem we find ourselves in is when someone does a poor toe touch and the person complains about hamstrings, what do then they do? They go to the gym and do what?
Well, and when they complain of tight hamstrings and we immediately do what they said and stretch out their hamstrings, that's the kindergartner controlling the class. And every kindergartner will control the class, but they don't deserve to because it's probably not going to be a healthy choice. When somebody can't do a functional movement and then they point to an area and say, this is tight, you don't have to believe them or not believe them. It's simply a piece of information that you must vet. So if you bring a mobility test to that body part, but what many people are actually pointing to is area of discomfort or pain, and that's different. That's different.
But in that example, they can do a sitting reach. They can get their toes, maybe past their toes when they're sitting. They're standing, they can't. Is that a tissue problem or a tone problem?
That's a tone problem. And that tone problem could be appropriate because I may not want them going any deeper in their toe touch because they might not be able to control the balance. So it's a self-limiting thing. So
hold on, because that's important.
I know.
Because I think right there, what you just described is kind of what we went back to where people don't have good tissue. Is it they are creating tension in the posterior aspect, maybe their hamstrings, because that's what they have to do or they're going to face plant.
You got it. So here's where I take issue with the tissue talk. If you look at the products, services, education offered in the name or umbrella of mobility health, okay? If your tissues don't slide well, your joints don't move well, most of these products will help you loosen things up and develop better tissue. But there's not an equal amount of products, services, and education to that tone. So if you got bad tissue, whether you lay on your back and I lift your leg up, or I ask you to sit up and reach down to your toes, or whether I ask you to stand and touch your toes, the tissue should largely represent the same, meaning a true mobility problem will be consistent regardless of posture. And we talk about posture in three simple ways.
What do you mean by consistency? So in that example we're talking about, and I think it's an easy example where all of us wrap our heads around. Can't touch your toes standing. Consistency would mean they can't touch their toes sitting.
Or lying down, right? I could lay you down and lift your toes up to where you could touch them. I could have you sit on your butt and reach out and touch your toes if you stand. If we truly have a frozen shoulder, it acts frozen in all positions. I could sit you up, shoulders frozen, sit you down. Ankle dorsiflexion, you broke your ankle, you've got a really stiff joint, the pins came out, but it's stiff as hell. I don't care what position I put you in, I'm gonna come up against some stiffness. And I think we've got good products and services to loosen up that shit.
Those products and services would be appropriate. And
exactly.
Here's where I think we get pushback, Gray.
Okay.
Is when someone can't touch their toes, how do you define that? Is that a mobility problem or a stability problem? Because okay, I'll let you answer that question.
It's a functional problem.
Episode 70, Walking Away from Pain, Wellness and Fitness with James Breeze.
I was sleeping on maybe less than 4 to 5 hours a night because I was going through a long period in the shifts, and it was high-end stressful shifts as well with some of the work we're doing because I was a part of some of these specialist units at the time back then. But I was like living on maybe 5 hours if I was lucky. I was sitting down in a car for long periods of time, so long periods of inactivity for maybe 7-8 hours at a time. Then there were fast moments of explosiveness work. I was wearing a lot of kit on myself. I was wearing big clumpy boots, like military style boots as well. So throw that into the fact that back then you could get free Starbucks. Police officers in London get a free drink of coffee at Starbucks. I was going for the big like lattes and like coffees in Starbucks like 2-3 times, maybe sometimes 4 times a day to keep me going. And then, and then throw the whole breathing side of things as well. That all was compounding onto each other. And then we were having to train for an hour a day in the gym, and I was going just to the big compounds, lifting as heavy as I could, because I was young, dumb, that type of mentality back when I was back then. So we'd lift heavy. I'd have all these underlying lifestyle issues that I didn't even know I was aware of or was causing an issue. And looking back now, I can see it as plain as day. And that's some of the most important things. When I speak to other police officers now, or the tactical military operatives, that's some of the first things I want to look at, is because, look, we've got to address those issues which aren't going to go away because that's part of day-to-day life. But we've got to address them before we go to the big fun stuff, because we all want to do the fun stuff in the weight room or go out for the runs or whatever you want to do. But it's those fundamental human basics of lifestyle that we have to address first, because, again, I see it with our clients, our day-to-day clients, not just the military guys and the police officers. But some people, if you haven't got nailed the basics down properly, you're always going to struggle. And that was one of the biggest things that happened to me. It was not having the basics, and I was compounding this effect of adding more weight onto dysfunction. I wonder who said that quote, right? You know what I mean? It was that was happening, and it just added up over time, and then went pop. At a point where I didn't need it to go pop, and that was the moment. That was the moment I've had enough, and it led me to a big shout out to Tommy Blom, actually, from Sweden. He was the one who introduced me to kettlebell, and then it led me to FMS and stuff like that. So it's a funny old journey, but something has to happen to you first, I think, for your journey to truly start to dive into the world. And I'm sure all of us can relate to that too.
Yeah, and I think that's the tip. You had that tipping point. You had that moment where you realized you had to make a change. And I think you said something right there in that little soundbite, James, is that awareness. You realized that it was your lifestyle, things that you weren't not aware of, that was leading to that tipping point for you. And I think right now, as professionals in this space, we're trying to bring that up to the people we work with. How do you specifically, James, bring that up and get that buy-in from the people you're consulting with? Because you said something right there too, that it's not just the tactical groups you're working with, the police, the fire, the military people, just the person going into the office every day. How do you get them to become more aware that, you can go online and find a cool exercise to improve your hip mobility or your upper back mobility. Okay, I want to get my arms bigger. Those are easy. It's leaning into the fundamentals that people don't want to do. So give us some of your insights on how do you get people to lean in to start considering that and become more aware?
Yeah, sure. So this is the thing for us. So I remember this, again, it's one of those epiphany moments where I can't believe it's this simple, but this is what's happening. So I think it was after I saw you in Perform Better Germany, actually. We were talking about ideas of taking the FMS and doing stuff online. We started looking at some of the data, because just like you guys, I'm a data geek. My master's actually is in computer science. I'm a bit of a data geek when it comes to this stuff and mining whatever we saw. So what I saw was, we have two kind of types of clients, which I call them performance guys who are trying to go for a specific goal, an event, or competing in a sport. And then we have lifestyles, where people just want to try and lose a little bit of weight, feel a bit better, that type of thing. And what we were finding was that a lot of the lifestyle guys we were working with weren't staying with us as long term or getting the same results as some of our performance clients were. And I was trying to figure out, how can we see the data and compare them? Because it's hard to compare somebody who's going for an elite Spartan race to somebody who's trying to lose their first 30 pounds or something like that. It was just, how do we find it? What's the data that we can all compare and contrast that we're pulling across? And then it just hit us. I had all these spreadsheets out and looking at the data from all our clients from the last 6 months. And we saw three key things. And three things that went, oh my God, this is the light bulb moment here, and how we're struggling to keep them on board and also getting the results they really want. The first thing was walking. What we saw was, on average, our performance clients were walking between 8,000 and 10,000 steps a day. That was the first thing, compared to our lifestylers who are averaging less than 3,000. And I was like, hang on a second, we can compare this now, because it's something we can compare and contrast the data to, because it's something they can all relate to. They all need to walk around and move around. So that was the first thing. The next thing, we looked at hydration. We asked them, rather than measure their glasses, because everyone's got different ways of measuring in ounces or liters, whatever it was, we said, how many glasses of water do you have a day? Again, it came down to the performance guys were having about 7, and then the lifestylers were having more 1 to 2 if they were lucky. That was the other thing here. And then the third thing, right? And we're looking at this all from all over the world. The data we're pulling from all over, and the third thing was sleep. The performance guys were averaging 7+ hours a night of sleep. The lifestylers were literally, if they were lucky, getting 5.5 to 6, right? And I know sleep's the hardest thing. So that was the first thing we saw, was oh my God. which then came up with the acronym, what we call it WWS, walk, water, sleep. Because now for us, we think it's so imperative to have these fundamental basics of walking, water, and sleep, which I'm sure we can all agree with, because in the world of corrective exercise, there's polarizing ways of thinking about things. Some guys think something's good, something's bad, same as nutrition, religion, or politics, all these things is polarizing. But I think WWS, we can all technically agree on that is something that's good for you. I think it's like almost like a middle ground that you have here that we can play around with. Okay, so it's okay, this is a starting point. So we then, right, okay, look at the data, look at the research. They say, good, about 7,000 steps improves life expectancy for most people. 7 glasses of water is approximately, half your body weight in ounces, give or take.
Let me interrupt right here, because what I think I love the way you're coming at this, but if you're drinking 7 glasses of water a day, you actually take up space from something else you would be drinking. So not just is it this great flush you're getting, but the hydration lesson you're getting is how many times do you reach from something wet and it's got sugar, caffeine, and a bunch of stuff you're not really going to metabolize anyway. So I love this rule of 7s, because you call it WW, but I'm seeing 7 come all the way through there.
777 rule. That's exactly right.
I love it.
That's exactly what we call it. The WWS and the 777 rule is what just came about. Just randomly looking at data. It was like, what's the film with like Russell Crowe? It's A Beautiful Mind, where he's got all these numbers and stuff on here. Suddenly, like basic data from all this was like sticking out on the screen for us, and we saw this. So it became WWS and the 777 rule. And what we found was that if we get people walking more, they're naturally inclined to drink more water. And as they're walking more and drinking more water, suddenly their sleep starts to improve automatically. Now, I always think sleep is the hardest thing to correct. And I also get it if you've got kids, working shift, it's also super hard to manage, but we can do some little baby steps here. And what we found was when people are trying to follow a nutrition plan or like a high-end type of strength training plan, if they haven't got the basics in place, we're basically getting them to do something with their hands tied behind their backs, because they're never going to succeed. They can't do the fundamentals and basics of human movement right first, right? Or what we all need to begin with. How can we expect them to do a good, solid nutrition plan to help them lose weight? So it then became that if they haven't got WWS in place, we would not even look at nutrition.
Episode 71. The hip is the hub. Functional hip mobility. That brings us back to the whole conversation about regional interdependence.
Yes.
So you just said that really quick. Break that down a little bit further.
As in maybe the joint by joint approach?
The joint by joint approach.
Okay. Mike Boyle and I were talking about
We can't say this enough.
I know, I can't say it enough. The foot needs to be stable. The ankle needs to be mobile. The knee needs to be stable. The hip needs to be mobile. The back needs to be stable, not stiff. All right. Now, let me
this
go back.
This is when you're moving. We're not talking about when you're laying on a table.
Well, if the one of the best conversations that Paul Hughes ever took me through was structure governs function, but function influence structure. The foot is made to be sensory. Therefore, it is gifted anatomic mobility, right? You need to have some integrity in your arch if you want to enjoy a good foot. Whereas your ankle is built structurally stiff, but we measure its function through mobility. So your ankle is already built to be way more stable than your foot because it is a lever of transfer.
Because of its structure, the way it's built.
Got it. We get up to your knee, dude, knees are not stable. They got a lot of ligaments and they only hinge, but man, when we watch valgus collapse or an ACL injury happening, we see how vulnerable that knee is. So the knee is inherently built for mobility. Look at the range of motion you can cover with your knee and your elbow, right? But it has to be stable, meaning we need a VMO. We need a good quad hamstring ratio. We get up to the hip, it is built to be stiff. I mean, the last,
just the amount of tissue that surrounds the hip.
I mean, think about it. Right up until the time Bo Jackson dislocated his hip, nobody had ever done what that guy did. I think his 40-yard dash and his accomplishments in baseball, he was just getting started. And it took a lot. And I think I was watching the documentary the other day. It wasn't the guy that pulled his hip out of socket. Bo Jackson was so unbelievably strong that when he was in a full stride and one foot got held up and the other wasn't, he kept going forward because it always worked before. So between the strength of that guy and his own athleticism, he probably shredded his own hip socket. But to the point, if your hip gets stiff, it's got no reason to get mobile unless you become conscious of it, because it will drive everything.
So when you're functioning, because I think what you're describing, structure versus function.
Yes.
When you're functioning, I go and say, do a single leg stance. Your foot, even though it's inherently built to be mobile, I mean, think about all the bones and everything. I mean, you got a lot of different joints in your foot that move. And if I get you on the table, great, I can move your foot all over the place.
Yes.
But when you stand on one foot, your foot better almost grab the ground.
Goes from a bag of bones to a claw.
Yes. It needs to be stable under function.
Yes.
And when you take a step and you're moving, that foot should go through it should have a little bit of mobility, but it should be stable and control. Your ankle should then be mobile during that situation.
Yes.
Your knee should be stable. Your hip should be mobile. Your back stable, your thoracic spine, rotation, all should be. And then you just go that joint by joint. And every other joint functionally should play off of each other.
And the uphill battle is if your ankle decides to become really stiff or your hip decides to become really stiff, it's going to make the knee, the back, and the foot do bad things. And that could be a problem, because the reason you walk into my clinic is going to be for plantar fasciitis, a knee sprain, or a bad back. It's not going to be for hip.
Yeah, nobody's coming in saying, great, my hip hurts. Can you help me out?
Right. And they will, but then that's a different problem too. But what I'm saying is, if ankle or hip gets stiff, you're going to have to get that out of there before anything else can spontaneously get stable, because the foot is already obliged to adapt and compensate. That's what it's built for. The knee is already obliged to adapt and compensate. That's what it's built for. And your back is designed to oblige and compensate, because that's what it's built for. It is a sensory mobile thing that becomes stiff with integrity under load. But these major drivers, the hip transfers energy, the ankle transfers energy. So it's got a lot of structure in there. And that structure wants to be stable, but it doesn't have to be stiff. And when they do get stiff, unless you loosen them up, they will always exploit the joints above and below. And so the joint by joint approach, on second thought, is about relationships. When a pattern is broken, it's really cool to go back and look at those relationships, because if you're stiff in an already stable area, it'll drive the show. Once you're not stiff in that area, you may still need to do something like an orthotic or a piece of tape on the knee or some type of brace on the back, just so it can behave without compensation to change habit, right? But those mobile segments will always give up something, because a stable segment will never volunteer it.
And that's when, and again, Greg, that was the reasoning behind coming up with a movement screen, to look at general movement postures and positions to see how the joints react and respond in different positions.
Yes.
Just because the hip works well in a squat doesn't necessarily mean it'll work well in a lunge. So we got to look at these multiple positions and look at global patterning before we start looking at segments or different joints of the body. Even though we're talking about the hip's the primary conversation today, but start by looking at the global first. Episode 72. Poor ankle mobility. Start with why.
Our journey started with, if you're upright on your feet and consider yourself functional and have stiff ankles, we got 3 patterns that say you're not. And it's not bad. That's the forecast. You can do anything about that forecast you want. A risk factor is nothing but a forecast. It's going to rain on Thursday. Pack a raincoat or not. I don't care. I already told you which way it's going. So number one is know how to be aware you got an ankle mobility problem and realize what's good enough for both symmetry and the activity you're going to. Then, can you pass strength test and performance test involving the ankle, like a Y balance test and Lee's test, the standing broad jump we did, we jump off one, land on two. Safety's already built in there. But what we're really looking is what puts you through the air. And if you've got an ankle mobility problem, you can't load those tissues. We expect lower power. And if you do have good ankle mobility and you don't know what to do with those tissues, now we know how to train them. But if you don't have ankle mobility, you don't even have the proprioceptive alignment.
Right. I was getting ready to say, Gray, you said a lot about tone and tension, and you get into muscle integrity, all those fancy things. And it really comes down to, if you don't have good mobility, that's not giving proper feedback to the brain to tell the muscles what to do. You're lacking a little bit of input. And that's where we always say you need to have good mobility. We want you to have good mobility, as you said, minimum amount, at least reach the minimum amount, so that the joint can give good feedback and good information, so that you have good alignment and all that. And that's proprioceptive input. That's motor control. That's stability. All those things we always talk about. But we start talking about the ankle and the foot, and we did a whole podcast on the foot. I think it was last season, but we're talking about the ankle. It does start at the ground and how you react. But if you've got a lack of ankle mobility, it impacts your throwing, your balance, all this other stuff. But then a lot of people may not complain. It's not one of the major, injuries or painful areas in the body. Where do most injuries occur in the body? Backs, you say spine, low back, shoulders, and knees.
Yes.
And if we start thinking about what is a lack of ankle mobility, why does that put more stress on the knee? Because you never hear people talk about, my ankles are injured or hurt. They talk about, I sprain my ankles a lot.
What's the number one injury in high school?
Yeah, ankle sprains.
Ankle sprains. The most catastrophic injury in high school is usually an ACL or some type of back fracture, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But the ones that, they happen so much, nobody cares anymore. But the whole point is, what's the rehab protocol for a grade 2 ankle sprain at the high school level, with or without an athletic trainer? If I don't hurt, I'm playing. Coach said I can.
Yeah, and then they go through and they tape the ankle in order to get on the field. So in essence, they're now locking up the ankle, putting more stress on the knee. And if we think about the joints around the biggest areas of concern, the knee, the back, and the shoulders. Well, now you got the ankle, the hips, and the upper back and T-spine.
Right.
And if you follow or read much about anything these days, all you hear about is, we got to get the hips moving. We got to get the ankles moving. We got to get the T-spine moving. It's all connected. And that kind of leads me to the conversation about this idea of regional interdependence.
Okay.
Is what you and I have been describing. When we talk about movement, that's really what we're talking about. Everything is connected. I mentioned it in my little first kind of start, my little monologue to kick this thing off, is we got data that says you got a lack of ankle mobility, good chance you got a lack of upper body mobility, and that's our shoulder mobility test. So we can't just think about this myopic, I got to create good ankle mobility. We got to create good ankle mobility and set the stage so all the other joints are working well together. And this idea of regional interdependence is not new.
No,
it's not something it's been around a while.
If you're rehabbing with unknown problems, they burden the rehabilitation. If you're trying to get your back out of pain and have stiff hips and ankles, it's going to be a different journey for you than somebody who's also got back pain and doesn't have those issues.
Episode 73, Priorities and Program Design with Mike Diebler.
Just like you said, we've got to bring that breathing awareness into the next thing, because if I'm doing tall kneeling turns or I'm doing box jumps, there's a different breath signature there. But there's also a recovery breath between, and so I think doing a breath corrective is becoming very vogue now. Everybody's got a little exercise that's going to help you breathe better. But if we're not also there to match an appropriate breath, and one of the things we're doing right now is, like when you're doing a turn, I can justify both an inhale or an exhale helps you turn. If you need integrity and a little bit of stability, usually the inhale makes the movement better. If you're carrying too much tension into that direction, an exhale makes it better. Both are correct, but I don't know which one's going to work for you. But taking the breath lesson, crocodile breath, into a movement drill, into an activity, is the progression of breath awareness. It's not just reset your breathing. And I think half the room got it, and half the room still thought the crocodile breath was good breath medicine. I'm going to breathe better the rest of the day. And you might, if you don't stress it. But the minute you stress it, what do? You default back to the shallow breath. Well, that's exactly what the exercise is. If we're in a corrective, we're stressing you in a direction that you don't own yet. And if you're pushing yourself into conditioning, you're going to be tapping into some metabolic reserves that you don't often touch. So,
yeah, and I think obviously breathing is one of those topics that people have very strong beliefs and opinions, and obviously it's important. But I think I know we're talking about programming, so I'm hopefully not going too off topic here. But I think breathing is something that should be programmed in to any exercise. Like you said, there's different styles of breathing. If I'm going to have you get under a heavy bar or deadlift a max load, there's a very specific breath you should use that's going to keep you safe and stable. But assuming you're doing sub-maximal loading, I know that the kind of old exhale on exertion is the breathing thing that most of us probably learned back in the day, and that was it. That was just what you did to lift weights, and I think that kind of stuck. And then if you bring up the idea, well, now I want you to inhale during this certain movement. Flip your breathing around. And if we think about everyday life, you're going to just be breathing, right? And you should be able to breathe in all sorts of positions, inhale, exhale, whatever the movement might be. And I think that's critical for understanding when I'm designing a program is what kind of breathing cues should I give this person? Because maybe they're just stuck, and because they aren't even thinking about breathing at all, just make them aware, like flip it a little bit, make them think about something different. And now they're thinking about their breath while they do a plank, a lunge, a squat, whatever it might be, assuming it's submaximal. Why can't we switch these things around and program that in there?
Episode 74, Comfort, Scarcity, and Movement with Michael Easter.
No, I had a relationship maybe 12, 15 years ago with a company called PowerPlate, and they were the ones that first introduced that vibratory. You stand on this big vibrating disc, and it just sort of jars you. It's basically standing close to a jackhammer without actually holding on to it. And
I remember those.
Yeah, and they were popular, and we were thinking maybe as a neurological Red Bull, and I played with it. And there was a slight optimization effect, just I guess like shooting a Red Bull or something like that. But they did notice a change in bone density in older females in the UK. And all that vibratory plate did is dropped out from under you and let you have about 60 impulses of gravity really quick. But carrying does the exact same thing and also fixes balance and posture, whereas the vibration plate, you can stand on that thing and slouch. And now are you really getting bone density or shear force? So people were willing to spend $10,000 on a bone density supplement when a ruck will get you ready for Disney World with the grandkids, but also get you ready for battle. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think that one of the things I love about it is the barrier to entry, especially for rucking, is so low for the average person. Everyone has a backpack at home. Now, look, I love GoRuck as a brand. Their stuff is amazing. But when people ask me, how do I start rucking? It's, do you have a backpack at home? The answer is inevitably yes. Do you have anything that weighs anything at home? The answer to that is yes, because it can be anything. It could be water bottles. It could be some bricks wrapped in a towel, whatever you have. And you have a way to get into a great exercise that has no money attached to it, right? So I just find that to be, most people, I think, what stops them is going, well, I don't have X, I don't have Y, the conditions aren't perfect, all these other things, right? And if you can just get someone to realize, like, you can do things right now that are going to be great for you, that's change maker right there.
Well, you've almost found yourself in a rucking advisory role. And I think it's because of your ability to articulate things clearly, just like McDougall found himself almost in a running advisory role, even though he came to it as an investigative journalist. He was able to articulate some of the reasons people are supposed to do stuff better than the, people that sort of helped define the science in the first place. And I think that narrative is unbelievably important. And next time you're talking to somebody about that low barrier of rucking and you already have a way to shoulder weight, the conversation for the fitness-minded people immediately goes to, can I just get a vest? And there's a good argument for the vest because you can load it equally. However, I love things that self-calibrate my awareness. And so if we carried I would say you don't have to go heavy in weight, but at least about 15 to 25 pounds on one shoulder as opposed to both, right? So the first 2 minutes, left shoulder, second 2 minutes, right shoulder, 3 minutes of a conventional carry, and then 3 minutes up front. What's going to happen is they're going to have 4 completely different experiences. And it's not about rucking anymore. It's about the way they like to carry weight. So we can take people who are really stiff in their low back and hamstrings, barely make a toe touch, and they will feel significantly better carrying the weight, say, up front or on the back, as somebody who sort of doesn't like to be on that left leg nearly as much as the right. When we put that ruck pack on the opposite shoulder, they're going to feel better and go longer without fatigue than the other. So it's almost like getting this 3D with a simple backpack or ruck pack that gives you north, south, east, and west. The thing is, the front and back should be almost equal, and the left and right should be almost equal. The left and right will never be as good as the front and back because you're carrying it over one strap and two. But that self-awareness on a 2 or 3 mile walk is amazing, because I could have told you that ahead of time if I'd gotten to take a movement sample on you, because I know whether you're the posture guy that sort of is more on your heels, more on your toes, more to the left, more to the right. So I would love you to maybe think about, recommend that on those first few rucks somebody does, not just how long can I go with the backpack. And I honestly think there's a self-awareness that comes out of that, just like it does out of yoga or Tai Chi or any other time we direct you in a direction that you might not otherwise go without permission. So
yeah, I agree. And I think what I tend to find is that, especially among men, they hear about rucking, or they read the rucking chapter in my book, and then it's like, okay, how heavy can I make this thing and how far can I go? And it's usually not the right answer right off the bat. Not that you don't want to work up to things that are going to be challenging, but to your point, sort of easing in, trying different things, feeling out different positions and seeing how that goes, what you can learn from that, I think can be a great teacher. And what I love about kind of what's happened after I've written this book is that it's sort of introduced more people to the idea. And, as you kind of mentioned, I've kind of become an expert. At the same time, I see myself as more a communicator of like the general idea and general themes that I would say the average person can comprehend. But then, this is where guys like you come in, and you're doing stuff in the lab and able to go so deep down the rabbit hole. And then we can have these conversations that sort of bring this stuff up to the average person and make it really useful. So it's super cool. I love what you guys are doing.
Episode 75. Is wellness in the way of fitness? Well, great. That's why we developed the functional wellness screen. Not that we just wanted to have another test for us to do. It's how we figured out, I guess is maybe a better word, how important those lifestyle components will impact your ability to move well. And it's really about the outcomes. Yeah. We're screening all these factors because we want to get better outcomes. And in order to get better outcomes, we got to figure out what's the most efficient way to start the person on the right path.
It is. And the most efficient way is, let's not deny the truth that's laying in front of us. Obesity is associated with metabolic and musculoskeletal disorders at a higher rate than almost anything else that's acceptable in our current culture. If you got a balance issue and I don't alert you with that, I'm irresponsible. If you are overweight and it's connected to a lot of bad things you're headed for, I'm just going to tell you the truth about it. I had a patient the other day who has an elective back fusion opportunity. It's not an emergency. There's no neurological impairment. Reflexes are down on one side, but it's been that way for a while. So his doctor has suggested if things get worse, we might be looking at a fusion. He wanted to be proactive and go ahead and get the fusion. And I looked at him and I'm like, would you agree you're 45 pounds overweight? He goes, yeah. I said, do you sleep well? He goes, no. I'm like, do you ever drink water? He goes, absolutely not. And I'm like, what's your activity level? And he said, farm work. And I said, I think your next 2 months would be better invested taking a fitness approach within the confines of physical therapy. Your doctor will easily refer you for physical therapy, but you're here to move better and lose weight. And quickly, he volunteered. I drink 4 Dr. Peppers a day. I'm like, do you realize there's a product on Amazon right now that tastes just like Dr. Pepper with 0 calories? And it's got Stevie. He goes, will it taste the same? I'm like, you're not a baby. Get over it. Drink 4 of those a day. You'll be fine. And the funny thing was, 10 years ago, I would have withheld that and stayed in my musculoskeletal lane. Guy's heading for a fusion. There's no way he's not heading for a fusion. He's sleep deprived. He's dehydrated. He's not breathing well. He's doing farm work. And he already is a candidate for a fusion. What I just tried to do was remove the 6 risk factors that he's getting ready to go into surgery with. Because if we could take him down to 2, oh, by the way, he's a type 2 diabetic, but he probably won't be in about 6 weeks. You see what I'm saying? So this guy is medicated so he can continue a lifestyle that's toxic.
Right. It's about, you mentioned the word baggage. If he, in this example, goes and does the surgery without addressing those other areas, he's going to be in worse situation, in worse shape after 6 months, a year after that surgery. His back may feel a little bit better, but over time, he's going to get in worse position. Episode 76, Cash-Based PT, Comprehensive Care Without Restrictions with Lisa Chase.
Their risk factors are an equal consideration to the diagnosis, where if they don't have risk factors, it's not. So that's where Symmio and what we know about musculoskeletal health risk factors is really helping me become not a better diagnostician. The diagnosis is 50% of the equation. The prognosis is diagnosis plus risk factors equals prognosis. And so grade 1 ankle sprain with a boatload of musculoskeletal risk factors and regional interdependence means you could be limping 2 months from now if we don't do this. You can have a grade 3 ankle and no risk factors, and give me about 3 weeks. I will have you almost there. And so too many people have invested quite a lot of time and technology in the silo of musculoskeletal part-based diagnosis, not realizing the system's in a toxic lifestyle. You're not even going to get good feedback loop. You could do everything right, and the feedback loop you need to be a good clinician isn't going to be there because you didn't line up the dominoes first. You just started shoving on dominoes, wondering why you didn't get this great party trick that you get sometimes. Well, they're not ready.
Well, we mentioned Symmio, and Symmio is just what we designed as a wellness screen to try to identify the minimum things that we know that matter and give the person the ability to check themselves over time, whether it's an Oura Ring or a Whoop or whatever it is, just a way to keep your eye on the gauges. And my last question for you, Lisa, is, we got to keep our eye on the gauges. We also need to understand and make sure that the people that we're working with understand it's going to change. They can walk out the door today and feel great, and you just patted them on the back. And this is what I'm going to ask you, Lisa. Pat them on the back and say, "Great job. They're feeling great. You're being discharged." But 2 weeks from now, their gauges are changed because life gets in the way. Everything's a behavior. So, what's that transition look like for you, Lisa, with some of your patients to when you're taking this holistic approach? What are some of the things you look for when you say, "Okay, they're ready to go"? But what advice do you give them to say, hey, you need to keep track of these things. And if these things get below the threshold, remember, good enough, do they come back in, or how do you make that transition?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the majority of patients, what we try to encourage is either to move into our preventative program or to have some kind of a maintenance, whether it's coming in, some come in monthly, some come in quarterly. But just like you'd bring your car in to have your car checked, it's like bring your body in to get your body checked so we could get ahead of these things, right? And then giving them tools, saying, hey, let's find a wearable where you could be tracking. Let's use Symmio to be tracking lifestyle. So you're getting some information that you can self-monitor, and then kind of saying, okay, look, I'm giving you these things, here's your home program, here's, different tools that you can use. If you see that you can't, like your heart rate variability is staying low and you just can't change it, or, you're finding that this muscle's starting to feel tight again. And no matter what exercises I do, I'm starting to feel that tightness or lack of mobility. And the things I've given you are not working, then that should be a red light. Hey, come on in. Let's take a look. So trying to give them self-management tools that they can use and identify when there's going to be a problem and what they can do on their own, and then when it's time to come back in.
Episode 77, The Future of Sports Training, Data, Integrity, and Adaptability with Darcy Norman.
It's always a test retest. Like I'm doing something, I'm retesting. And if I see even a glimmer of hope and change in what I just did to improve that, then it's okay, how much did I improve it in that moment? And then in the next time I see them a day or two later or whatever, the next day, did that change stick or did we backslide? And then that's also giving you information of, how fast you think you might be able to progress them. And then, it's never a perfect formula, because there's also this re-education piece that has to take place where you may unlock something and their test is great, but now you got to do a little bit of constraints-led learning in their movement skill scenario to reintegrate that into the pattern. And I think that has a big add to this as well, because you can make that change. They can come back tomorrow. They look the same as they did the day before. But if you can get them to use it and repattern it, then it's going to, I think, stick more and you're kind of off to the races.
One of the tricks that has taken me about 25 years to really appreciate is hitting save on the document. Meaning I'd like, and you hit the nail on the head. I used to make an impressive mobility change, but then have to go back and backfill stability, right? Now what I'm trying to do is take that movement signature I see, that pivotal dysfunctional pattern, that left-right asymmetry in single leg stance or two completely different lunges on the same human. And what I found is corrective strategy works. Test, retest, corrective strategy works. But what we also started doing is doing corrective strategies and then having somebody get on a jump box or do about, minute and a half worth of plyos or pretty hard impact. And what we realized is we had a fragile change that didn't hold. And then I started thinking, it's going to be hard for the body and brain to hold on to dysfunction if we attack the same pattern in maybe 3 different spinal positions. Supine, quadruped, half kneeling, or half kneeling, standing, quadruped, because it's really hard to hold on to that dysfunction because so many things change. The role of the spine in quadruped completely changes going vertical. And so that was the trick. You don't just bang on the pattern at a single station like 3 sets of 10 chops and lifts to the left. You actually make them show you a good example of that pattern and then come from supine to standing at a few stations. And that's where I've really started batching corrective strategy and saying, if all you got is time to warm up, I think I can fit your corrective in there, thus nudging your state of readiness, but also incrementally reducing your future risk at the same time.
Episode 78. CBD and Recovery, Breaking Stigmas with Expert Insights with Matt Krause.
Well, no, and I like the fact that you came right out of the gates by saying it supports your treatment, which also infers that it's not a solitary treatment. It's part of a systematic approach to saying, all right, now we got the pain compartmentalized. Let's help you manage it while we continue working on the source, the causes, the behaviors, the dysfunctions, whatever else we're unpacking. That, that's the whole point that I'm excited about upstream medicine. Just because we got onto the thing that causes it doesn't mean we're not concerned with the symptoms that you're going to have for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So a lot of times coming out of the gates with the SFMA, I said the secret in our sauce is we attack dysfunction. It doesn't mean we don't manage pain. It doesn't mean we don't offer up treatments. The point is we like to go ahead and make full disclosure that chasing the pain ain't the way we're going to get this tiger by the tail. But it doesn't mean we're not very concerned about keeping things as comfortable as possible while we do that.
Well, one thing is that we know with all the protocols that we discussed, and even adding the CBD, even in between manual therapy, sometimes you put somebody on a table, or you're doing the eye stem, or you're doing some cupping, right? We're going to add some of these exercises that you see up on your posters in between that. Did we get the restriction out, right? So if there was a movement restriction, put you on the table real quick, see how you feel, or do some stretching along with it, with some of the, and then you're using the CBD to get a better outcome. But you're using all these exercises in behind you, or behind me, right? Up on the posters that, you're going to put someone on the table, you're going to scrape them, you're going to do you say 90 seconds, 120 seconds, whatever it is. And then you're going to get out, hey, you're going to have someone move around. How do you feel? If not, let's get back on the table. Let's continue to work. So all of this is in conjunction with the treatment, right? Using the topical as well as using the exercise, right? The corrective exercises to make sure we're getting the outcome that we want from whoever, right? From the weekend warrior or the professional athlete. We got to make sure that they're all moving better. That's really why we're doing this.
If you want to learn more about today's podcast or dive deeper into functional movement systems information, check out some of the resources and offers we're providing in the description. That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.